Hey guys, I'm making this demo video as we're starting to think about incorporating value into our drawings. So I'm just going to kind of show the basics of what that looks like, how to do it with Micron pen, and then how to incorporate that into our drawings. So I'm just going to be drawing a couple basic value scales for you today to kind of get the ball rolling in the direction that we want to be headed. So what I've got on the screen now is some of the materials that you're going to need in order to draw your value scales. You've got your basic pen and paper, pencil, obvious necessities, and then I also like to use a straight edge, some kind of masking or drafting tape, and then just like printer paper or scrap paper, and I'll get into that later on. So we're going to go ahead and get started here by laying out the basic shape of our boxes for the value scale and more specifically the straight edges. So what I'm doing here with the tape and paper is just a little trick that I kind of like to do. Pretty much anytime you want a straight edge, when you're laying out a border for a composition or the edges of a value scale, you're going to want to put tape down in order to give you that straight edge that you're looking for, and then you can taper, but then you won't have any sort of, you know, extra ink bleeding anywhere where you don't want it. So one thing that I like to do is once I have my straight line and I know where the tape's going to go, rather than putting the entire strip of tape down, I'll put a piece of paper covering, 90% of the sticky surface of that tape, just so that enough of it is sticking to my actual page to allow allow for that straight edge without having too much, tape and I guess just portion of the sticky surface on the paper, and I'll get into why that is a little bit later on as well. Now, as you can see here, I'm working with my ruler and my parallel line tool in order to start laying out the shape and size of the boxes. So I'm using right here my 24-inch ruler. You can use a bigger one if you have it, but this is unfortunately the largest ruler that I own. So really any straight edge will work, but yeah, if you have anything bigger than 24 inches, that'll work as well. Now, once we've got the dimensions of our larger rectangle and our smaller individual value boxes figured out, we're going to start thinking about what it means to go through the value range. But before I move forward, let's take a quick pause just to review kind of what value means, more specifically in terms of what it means when drawing with Micron pens. I hope all of you remember this from lecture, but if not, its values essentially just the lightness or darkness of a color. And in our case with black, you go from pure white being the lightest or no color at all to full black being the darkest, and then your value range is going to be every uh, dark gray, light gray, middle gray, in between the black and the white. So here I've got my three rectangles that I'm going to be turning into value scales. The first one, I'm just going to do kind of a crude demonstration with pencil of kind of the basics of how we're going to do the value scale, which in retrospect, based on the fact that I just said it would go from white to black, um, not really sure why I put this in the video, but since I'm doing this voiceover afterwards and my video editing skills are not sufficient to cut this part out, you're just gonna have to watch it. And we're gonna use this as a lesson in poor planning and time management. So this value scale was more just to show the idea that we want a smooth transition from our darkest to our lightest section, even though in reality, when we're doing a value scale, we're going to want to use the full contrast of dark black all the way up to pure white. Next, we're going to use our masking tape to create a border around all edges of our rectangle for the value scale. And what this is going to do is just make sure we don't have any Micron pen going where we don't want it. It's going to create a clean border and just a more professional look. Again, you see me using my little tape trick here to minimize the amount of tape touching the paper. This is convenient because it's still going to give you the same clean border that you're looking for without causing a risk for part of your composition paper to be ripped up during the tape removal, which unfortunately I have done in the past, but this trick seems to mitigate that really well, as long as you're careful removing it. Now, once I finish this side, I'm going to add one last little bit of tape to the bottom, which is going to act as a divider between my individual values, just so that I have a clean distinction between the absolute black and the next stage up and so on. So as I continue the scale, I will be moving that up to make sure I don't accidentally enter the subsequent box with my current value. Now, Micron pen is an interesting media to work in value with because you can't blend it at all. So some of the techniques that we're going to use to create value are things such as hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, scribbling, anything that uses a consistent line but that you can build up over time to create darker spaces. For this first value scale, I've decided to stipple because I want to build up my immunity to drawing-induced carpal tunnel, but I also really like the aesthetic that it offers, especially when you have a complete drawing done in this style. Stippling is undoubtedly a slow and painstaking process, but it's really important to not cut any corners and make sure you're building up your deep blacks through the process that you choose, just because when you have your final complete composition, it's really going to show if you did choose to cut corners to cut down on the time. So just make sure that whatever you choose for building up value, you're sticking with that throughout your composition. Now, as we continue to build our value scale and move up towards the lighter shades, we're still going to be employing a very similar tactic as before with just the point of the pen, repeated dots, but we're going to be leaving a lot more space in between for that paper to actually shine through and give us the more grayish tone that we're going to be looking for. Obviously, you still have the pure black of the ink and the pure white of the paper, but as you can see, through less dots, and in some cases maybe you start off with a Micron pen that's a larger size like an 08, and then as you move up the scale you work your way down towards the smaller sizes, eventually ending up with an 01 or even an 005. Now that I'm seeing this video actually on screen and seeing the values from a little bit further away, I realize that as we get closer up to the top here, they might look like they take a very drastic step and it's not as smooth of a transition as it should be. But once you see the final product, which I'm going to put a photo at the end of this video demo, where you're going to be able to see the actual scale of the values, and it looks a lot better in person. The next line technique I'm going to be using is essentially just scribbling. You'll see what that means once I start here. It's basically just exactly what I said, just scribbling to build up value. Now, this isn't necessarily something that you're going to be using in 131 just because it's a little bit harder to control and have very precise values. Maybe it's something that you would bring more into 102, but it's one of my favorite ways to build up value with a Micron pen, and I think it's just something cool to kind of start to expose yourself with. I've slowed down this next section just so you can really see the action of what the scribble is like, and it's essentially just that, just scribbling. And I also find it's one of the most effective forms of drawing after 3 to 4 cups of coffee, as it requires very minimal amounts of fine motor control, which, as I mentioned earlier, makes the actual action of putting this on a drawing a little bit less precise. So it might not be the best option for a detailed drawing that you might be doing in this class, but it's still helpful to understand that there are many ways that you can build up value um, with a pen through line. In an attempt to not sound too much like a broken record, I'll let you watch me finish out this value scale, but just keep in mind that as I move up and work towards lighter scales, I'm just having less line and using a thinner micron pen as I go up. Now that I'm getting close to finishing up this value scale, it's time to start thinking about removing the tape. And a good technique to do that, to avoid any removal or ripping of your composition paper, is to just peel slowly and directly back rather than up, as this minimizes the strain being put on the paper from the sticky portion of the tape. Bruh. So as you can see, I was not careful enough while removing my tape and actually went ahead and ripped the top layer of my composition paper off, which is really going to take away from the craft of the final product. All jokes aside, this is a super easy thing to mitigate. Just make sure you're diligent when removing your tape, and you shouldn't have any issues with this. And essentially the final element of this value scale is going to be adding a border just to give it a nice clean line, clean up any imperfections left by the tape, and really make it pop out in the composition. I wanted to show a couple different options of things that you could do when finalizing your value scales. So as you can see on the scribble scale, I actually went ahead and outlined each individual value box, which, now that I'm seeing it, I'm not terribly fond of. I prefer the look of just the clean border on the outside and then letting the values and their individual divisions speak for themselves. At my peril, we'll let this serve as your second lesson of the day in pour planning, so just keep in mind to test things out on tracing paper or in your sketchbooks before going to your final composition with pen, because micron pen ink is in fact rather challenging to remove from paper. So here's a slightly higher fidelity shot of what I was working on this video. This is kind of what you're going to want to expect from a value scale, starting at black and ending up at white. Hopefully this video was at least slightly helpful and marginally entertaining. So good luck on your value projects and have a good rest of your day. Thanks for watching my demo video.